There is a quiet shadow inside every human being, not the kind that harms or destroys or seeks chaos, but the kind that whispers in moments when the world feels too heavy. A darkness shaped not by evil, but by exhaustion, by unmet needs, by the memories we don't talk about. People imagine the devil as something outside them, a force with horns, fire, temptation. But the real one is quieter, more familiar. It lives in the corners of the mind where shame sleeps, where anger wears silence as armor, where old wounds still breathe beneath the surface. This documentary is not about religion or demons. It is about the psychological patterns we call devils when we're too afraid to name them for what they truly are, the parts of ourselves we abandoned long ago. There comes a moment in every life when a person feels something shift inside them. Not loudly, not violently, just a slow, unexplainable heaviness settling behind the ribs, as if a small part of the mind has begun to watch the rest of the world from a few steps back. It often appears in silence, in the pause before answering a harmless question, in the breath held for a little too long, in the way the eyes drift away from the mirror because something in the reflection feels unfamiliar. Most people don't call it darkness. Not at first. They call it stress, tiredness, distraction, a phase, a mood. But beneath the labels, something older stays, a quiet shadow that has been waiting for recognition. It doesn't arrive like a threat. It arrives like a memory, as if some forgotten part of the self has finally grown tired of being ignored. The first shadow rarely reveals itself fully. It slips through small behaviors, a sudden irritability you can't explain, a habit of withdrawing even when you crave connection, a lingering guilt after doing nothing wrong, a strange emptiness on days that should have felt meaningful. You notice yourself becoming two people, the one who smiles on the outside and the one who tightens their chest on the inside. The subtle split is the first mark of the inner devil, not a creature of malice, but a fragment of the self that has learned to survive in silence. People who carry this shadow move differently through the world. They become experts in hiding, masters of quiet endurance. They apologize too quickly or grow defensive too easily. Their hearts feel heavier than their hands can hold, and yet they keep carrying it because they don't know any other way to be. The inner devil doesn't announce itself as evil. It emerges as a whisper, a soft pressure behind the mind that says, something is wrong. Something has been wrong for a long time, and you're finally strong enough to notice. Some sense it in childhood, the weight of expectations, the fear of disappointing someone they love, the early awareness that their emotions are inconvenient. Others meet it much later, after heartbreak, after betrayal, after realizing that people can wound without leaving scars. Regardless of when it appears, the moment of recognition feels strangely intimate, as if the darkness inside has been practicing your voice, your fears, your disappointments, and is now ready to speak. Many people try to outrun it. They keep themselves busy. They become hyperproductive, overly helpful, obsessively kind. Anything to avoid the stillness where the shadow waits. But the first shadow is patient. It knows every detour, every distraction, every mask. It waits for the quiet moments, when the world is finally silent and there is no one left to perform for. In those moments, you feel its presence more clearly, the tension in your shoulders, the sadness you cannot name, the irritability that feels out of character, the sharp, fleeting thought, why am I like this? Where did this feeling come from? Recognition is the beginning of the story, not the end, because the inner devil is not born from evil. It is born from unnoticed pain, unspoken truths, and long-forgotten emotional bruises. The moment you notice the shadow, you are not meeting an enemy. You are meeting a version of yourself that has lived too long in the dark. The first shadow is simply the self trying to be seen at last. Every shadow has an origin, not a dramatic one, not a moment worthy of storytelling. Often it begins in the quiet, unnoticed corners of childhood, in the spaces where a young mind learns what is safe to feel and what must be buried to survive. The inner devil does not start as darkness. It begins as a child's attempt to make sense of a world too complex, too loud, too fragile for a heart that has not yet grown its armor. Sometimes it forms in a home where emotions were not allowed to breathe, a place where anger sounded dangerous, where sadness was inconvenient, where vulnerability was met with silence or irritation. The child learned quickly that certain parts of them are too much, too sensitive, too emotional, too demanding of attention. So they hide those parts, folding them into small, secret corners of the psyche. Those corners become the first rooms where the inner devil learns to whisper. Other times, it starts with the opposite, when a child grows up unseen, not mistreated, not abused, just unnoticed. Their feelings become quiet guests in their own mind, waiting for someone to understand them. When no one does, the child learns to understand themselves in ways that feel lonely and heavy and older than they should be. In some stories, the origin forms from fear. Fear of losing love, fear of disappointing someone important, fear of being the reason someone else becomes angry. Children carry these fears like secret obligations, believing their job is to make everyone around them happy. When they fail, as all children do, the shadow deepens. It grows roots. There are also the moments of subtle betrayal, when the people who were supposed to protect became the source of confusion. Not monstrous betrayals, but the small ones that linger. A harsh tone, a broken promise, a look of disappointment so sharp it teaches a heart to avoid being seen. The inner devil grows in these quiet climates. Not as a rebel, not as a destroyer, but as a protector, a guardian built from fear rather than love. A voice that learns to speak when the child feels unheard. As a child grows older, the shadow matures with them. It learns the language of shame, the vocabulary of guilt, the grammar of emotional withdrawal. It becomes fluent in silence. It becomes fluent in pretending. By adolescence, it learns to negotiate survival. Hide your feelings. Stay small. Don't ask for too much. Don't tell them what hurts. Don't show them what you need. Don't let anyone see the real you. They won't understand. This quiet training becomes a blueprint for how the adult version of that child moves through the world. Some grow up thinking they are strong because they don't cry easily, don't complain, don't break. But inside them lives the early shadow whispering reminders of everything they once feared. That whisper becomes a devil, not evil, but wounded. And then there are those who learn to fight, to argue, to lash out, to protect themselves with anger because softness once felt dangerous. Their devil speaks loudly, but only because no one ever listened when it whispered. Every inner devil is a story of adaptation, a child doing the best they can with the emotional tools they had. A heart learning to carry burdens before it learned how to rest. The origins do not condemn anyone. They explain them. They reveal the architecture of the shadow that now follows them into adulthood. Before darkness can heal, its history must be understood. Because the devil inside was once a child trying to make sense of the world with a silence too heavy for their age. There's a reason the inner devil feels so real, so separate, so alive, as if it were a different being living inside the same mind. Not because it is a creature, but because the human brain is built to divide itself when experiences become too heavy to hold all at once. The mind is not a single voice. It is a collection of voices, memories, instincts, fears, habits, old emotional recordings, each speaking in their own tone. The inner devil is simply the voice that carries the weight of everything a person suppressed. Psychologists call it the shadow self. Neuroscientists describe it as a cluster of emotionally charged neural networks created during moments of intense feeling, moments the brain couldn't fully process at the time. These memories don't disappear. They reorganize. They gather together. They learn to speak. When someone is hurt, The amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm center, lights up like burning electricity. If the hurt is repeated or overwhelming, the signal becomes stronger. The brain, trying to protect itself, stores the experience in deep emotional memory, not as a story, but as a sensation, a reaction, a shadow. Over time, the body begins to react before the mind understands what's happening. A raised voice triggers fear. A small rejection awakens grief. A harmless argument sparks guilt or defensiveness. These automatic responses feel foreign, as if something inside is reacting on its own. This is the architecture of the inner devil, emotional memory speaking through instinct. Trauma researchers call this implicit memory, the things we remember without knowing we remember them. The devil's voice is built from these fragments. The tone someone once spoke to you with, the fear you weren't allowed to show, the anger you had to swallow, the cries you silenced so no one would hear. When these memories accumulate, they form an internal pattern, a set of beliefs that feels absolute. I am not enough. I am difficult to love. People will leave. Something is wrong with me. These thoughts do not come from logic. They come from survival. The brain prefers patterns over truth. Once it learns a pattern, it repeats it, even when the world changes. So the inner devil becomes a voice that warns you about dangers that no longer exist. It tells you to withdraw, to hide, to expect hurt even in moments of safety. This is not madness. It is adaptation. The mind would rather keep you lonely than let you risk being wounded again. But the inner devil does more than whisper warnings. It creates emotional imprints. When someone later treats you in a way that resembles your past, even slightly, your shadow reacts with the intensity of the original wound. A simple misunderstanding feels like abandonment. A gentle critique feels like a threat. A moment of vulnerability feels like danger. And you wonder, why did I react so strongly? Why does this small thing feel so big? The answer lives in the brain's dark architecture. The inner devil is not a monster. It is a memory system built from unresolved emotions that never had a chance to complete their story. Cognitive science also shows that the prefrontal cortex, the rational part of the brain, shuts down when emotions rise too quickly. This makes the shadow seem even more powerful. It speaks when logic goes quiet. It leads when clarity steps aside. It becomes a narrator of the moment. But this architecture is not permanent. The brain is plastic, capable of rewiring, relearning, softening old pathways. The inner devil can be understood, and through understanding, it can be integrated. Before that can happen, a person must first meet the war inside them. There comes a point when a person begins to feel torn, as if two versions of themselves are living in the same body, one trying to move forward, and one quietly pulling them back. This is the war within, the collision between who someone wants to be and who their shadow still believes they are. It often begins subtly, a plan to change a habit, a desire to speak more honestly, a hope to build healthier relationships. But the shadow resists, not because it hates growth, but because growth feels unsafe. When you survive by shrinking, expanding feels like danger. The inner devil responds first with discomfort, a tightness in the chest, a restless feeling beneath the skin, a sudden irritation that seems out of place. Small signals that the shadow is waking up, fearful that the world may hurt you the way it once did. Then comes the self-sabotage, the missed opportunities, the canceled plans, the unread messages, the avoided conversations. Not because a person doesn't care, but because the shadow is whispering that caring is costly, that connection is risky, that vulnerability is a weakness. People mistake this for laziness, or disinterest, or immaturity. But the truth is simpler. The shadow is doing its job. Its purpose is not happiness. Its purpose is protection. The inner devil fights every attempt to change because it remembers the pain that created it in the first place. When someone tries to trust again, the shadow reminds them of betrayal. When they try to open up, it whispers a memory of ridicule. When they finally find peace, it searches for signs of danger even in silence. This war is exhausting. A person might wake up feeling determined, only to crumble by evening because the devil beneath their ribs has spent the whole day preparing defenses against threats that no longer exist. And yet, the world never sees this battle. To others, they appear normal, even composed. Their conflict is internal, a quiet storm pulling at the edges of their mind while their face remains calm. Inside them, the dialogue is relentless. You're not good enough. They'll leave if you show too much. Don't trust them. Don't try. Don't hope. And somewhere beneath those thoughts, the person's real voice whispers back, "But I want more than this. I want to change. I want to feel alive." This is where resistance peaks, when both voices are loud enough to hear. In that moment, the person becomes both soldier and battlefield. They are the one fighting and the one being fought. They try to break old patterns while their shadow tries to drag them into familiar pain. Some people tighten. They become perfectionists, controlling every detail of their lives as a way to silence the chaos inside. Others become avoiders, running from everything that threatens to activate the shadow. And some collapse inward, numbing themselves so deeply that even joy feels distant. But beneath every reaction is the same truth. The shadow is terrified of being hurt again. Psychologists describe this as protective resistance, the mind sabotaging anything that feels like emotional risk. Not because it wants failure, but because it fears pain more than it desires change. The war within is not a sign of weakness. It is evidence of survival. A person is battling centuries of instinct, years of conditioning, and memories that still claw their way forward when they least expect it. The inner devil fights because it remembers. The self fights because it hopes. And somewhere between memory and hope, the first cracks of transformation begin. There is a moment in every internal war when something inside finally gives way. Not in defeat, but in recognition. A soft, trembling clarity that feels less like discovery and more like remembering something you have always known. For most people, this moment arrives quietly, in the middle of an ordinary day, during a simple conversation, or while sitting alone in a room that suddenly feels too honest. It often begins with exhaustion, the kind that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying emotions that have never been allowed to breathe. You look in the mirror one morning, and instead of seeing your reflection, you see the weight behind your eyes, the tiredness that has followed you for years, the tightness around your mouth that comes from swallowing too many truths. And for the first time, you don't look away. This is the moment the mirror breaks, when the image you've been protecting, polishing, and presenting cracks open to reveal the shadow that has been following you like a quiet silhouette. It is not a dramatic collapse. It is a slow unraveling. The realization that the inner devil was never an enemy hiding in the dark, but a wounded part of you waiting for permission to step into the light. Some people feel it during conflict, when an overreaction surprises them, when their anger isn't really anger but fear wearing a louder mask. Others feel it after hurting someone they love, when they realize the pain they caused came from a place inside themselves that still hasn't healed. And some feel it in stillness, those rare, fragile moments when there is nothing left to distract the mind from its own quiet truths. The turning point is this: the understanding that the devil within is not darkness seeking destruction, but pain seeking recognition. You begin to see patterns differently. The defensiveness that once felt like strength now looks like protection. The anger that once felt justified now feels like a boundary that grew sharp because the softer ones were ignored. The withdrawal that felt like indifference now reveals itself as fear of being misunderstood. In this moment, the shadow speaks clearly for the first time. I am not here to ruin you. I am here because no one ever listened to the younger version of you who needed protection. The mirror breaks because you can finally see the original wound behind the behavior. Not the embarrassing reaction, not the mistake, not the guilt, but the moment, long ago, when someone taught you that your emotions were unsafe. This clarity is disorienting. It softens a heart and sharpens the truth. You begin to understand that the parts of yourself you spent years rejecting were only trying to keep you alive in ways that now keep you small. The turning point is not enlightenment. It is permission. The permission to feel without apologizing, to hurt without hiding, to understand your reactions instead of punishing them, to let the shadow step closer instead of pushing it away. It is a moment you stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" and begin asking, "What happened to me that made this feel like survival?" Once that question enters a mind, something irreversible begins. The shadow loosens. The defenses soften. The inner devil looks less like a monster and more like the child you once were, scared, unheard, misunderstood. And that is a true breaking of the mirror, the moment you see yourself not as flawed or difficult, but as someone who adapted in the only way they knew how. It is the first step toward transformation, a moment of honesty that feels like the beginning of something finally waking up inside the heart. Healing does not begin with strength. It begins with softness, a gentleness toward the parts of yourself you once called unlovable, unmanageable, or dangerous. Most people imagine healing as a clean ascent, a transformation without mess, a rise without stumbling. But real healing is quieter, less heroic, more human. It begins in moments when you finally stop running from the shadow and allow it to sit beside you as something familiar, not frightening. For the first time, you do not silence a discomfort. You let it breathe. The tightness in your chest becomes a message. The sudden irritability becomes a signal. The sadness that appears for no reason becomes a memory resurfacing with the hope of being understood. Healing is not a battle with the inner devil. It is a conversation. And it begins with a simple shift. Seeing the shadow not as a threat, but as a part of your emotional lineage, a version of you that once carried pain so heavy it had to harden into protection. When you stop demanding perfection from your own heart, the heart softens. It stops bracing for impact. It stops expecting pain. It begins to exhale. Integration happens slowly, almost imperceptibly. You notice that your reactions, once sharp and immediate, now pause long enough for understanding to slip in. A moment of space opens between feeling and response. That small space is where healing breathes. You start recognizing which emotions belong to the present and which ones belong to your past. A raised voice no longer feels like danger, just loudness. A delayed message no longer feels like rejection, just timing. A mistake no longer feels like failure, just being human. The shadow starts learning, bit by bit, that the world is not the same as the one that created it. And you begin learning, bit by bit, that your darkness is not proof of something wrong within you. It is evidence of how deeply you once cared, how deeply you once hurt, and how deeply you are capable of feeling. Healing is not about erasing the devil. It is about teaching it a new language. Instead of reacting through fear, it begins responding through understanding. Instead of demanding control, it begins trusting safety. Instead of pushing you away from others, it begins allowing you to move toward them. People often think healing means becoming a lighter, softer version of themselves. But integration does something different. It makes you whole. You don't lose your sharpness. You learn to wield it with clarity. You don't lose your anger. You understand what it's trying to protect. You don't lose your shadows. You learn how to walk with them without letting them lead. Some days will still feel heavy. Some nights will still feel loud. The shadow doesn't disappear, but its voice changes tone. Where it once shouted, it now speaks in a way you can listen to. Where it once held you hostage, it now holds your history. Healing looks like small acts of courage, letting yourself rest without guilt, allowing others to see you without armor, feeling emotions without shame, choosing connection even when fear whispers otherwise. It is slow work, delicate work, the kind of work that doesn't look like progress until one day you realize you are no longer living in survival mode. The inner devil learns to breathe when you do. And in those moments of shared breath, you understand something profound. Your darkness was never trying to destroy you. It was waiting, patiently, desperately, to be welcomed back into the home of your own heart. In the end, healing does not erase the darkness. It illuminates it. The inner devil, the shadow you once feared, the voice you once resisted, the presence that once felt like a threat, becomes something different when seen with clarity. It becomes a story, a history, a memory of who you had to become to survive a world that did not yet know how to hold you gently. Most people spend years trying to kill their darkness, believing it is the obstacle between them and peace. But the truth is quieter. Your shadow was never your enemy. It was a part of you that chose to stay alive when everything around you felt overwhelming. There is a light behind every shadow. Not a blinding light, not a dramatic revelation, but a soft, honest glow, the kind that comes when you stop running from yourself. You begin to see that the inner devil was simply the guardian of your unprocessed pain, the protector of emotions you never had the chance to express, the keeper of truths you were too young to explain. When a person finally understands this, something inside settles. The heart no longer tightens at every challenge. The mind no longer prepares for threats that aren't there. The soul no longer confuses survival with identity. You become a little lighter, not because the darkness is gone, but because it no longer has to hide. The greatest transformation is this: you begin to trust yourself. Not the polished version you show to the world, but the whole version, the one with shadows, the one with softness, the one with memories that still ache sometimes. You understand that the devil inside you was never darkness seeking destruction. It was pain seeking acknowledgement. And once acknowledged, pain softens. It loses its sharpness. It becomes a companion instead of a captor. Life does not suddenly become easy, but it becomes honest. You no longer waste energy fighting parts of yourself that were never harmful, just hurt. And in that honesty, something beautiful emerges, a quieter kind of strength. Not the strength of pretending, or enduring, or suppressing, but the strength of being real with yourself. You begin to forgive the younger version of you who didn't know how to ask for help. You forgive the middle version of you who survived by shutting down. You forgive the current version of you who is still learning how to let love feel safe. The light behind the shadow is not perfection. It is understanding. It is sitting with yourself in moments of discomfort and whispering, "You are allowed to feel this." It is choosing compassion when your first instinct is self-blame. It is choosing gentleness when your shadow trembles with old fears. And slowly, you begin to see something clearly. There was never a devil inside you. There was only a part of you that had been in the dark too long. When the shadow is finally seen, it stops needing to scream. When pain is allowed to exist, it stops needing to control. When the wound itself is embraced, it stops needing to threaten. This is a quiet truth the world rarely teaches. Darkness and light are not opposites. They are companions. One defines the other. One shapes the other. One makes room for the other to be understood. You do not escape the shadow. You integrate it. You walk beside it. You let it rest. And in that shared stillness, you finally understand what it means to be whole. The psychology of the devil was never about evil at all. It was about the human heart, fragile, resilient, wounded, and always searching for a light gentle enough to see every part of it without fear.